be successful.
So what changes would you suggest?
I'd find another offensive line coach. And I like Denver Johnson, but for whatever reason, that offensive line, to me, did not perform like it should have. It had an all Big 12 guy on that line.
Yeah, Nate Solder was named first team all Big 12.
And that line gave up a lot of sacks. How many, two weeks in a row it gave up 8 sacks?
Right.
That line gave up a lot of sacks, did not have a great running game. So how does that line that has those kind of players on it not perform better?
I think the offensive line actually gave up 44 sacks this season, and I don't think another Big 12 team gave up 40, and most of them didn't give up 30.
Mm-hmm. And again, I go back to the running game, which I still think should be a strength of this team. I think they should be able to run the ball. So yeah, I'd look at making changes at offensive line, and I'd look at my offensive philosophy. I don't think this team has ever established an identity in offense. Are they a running team? Are they a passing team? Are they a spread team? What do they do? What is it that this team does?
Isn't that the responsibility of the head coach at some point after 4 years?
Well, yeah, and it's the responsibility of the head coach and the offensive coordinator. So I think you've got to bring in a coordinator, or if it's going to be Eric Kiesau, I was thinking if Eric Kiesau leaves, if he does it, you got to sit down and say, this is what we're going to do. We're not going to vary from this on week to week and then try this and keep on switching back and forth.
Okay. So now the Buffs obviously will turn their attention to recruiting. The current players on the team will turn their attention to off-season workouts, film study, trying to get better any way they can, obviously, and obviously getting good grades in school and whatnot, so they'll be eligible next season. In your mind, are there problems that can be addressed in recruiting? I mean, in recruiting, you don't typically go out and get it's not like the NFL where you're signing a free agent to fill a need.
Well, and it's hard to do because you're going to get in freshmen, and you're not expecting those freshmen to come in. When in NFL, you sign a free agent, defensive back, you expect him to come in, start for you right away. College football, you're recruiting freshmen, and very seldom do you go out and see a bunch of freshman kids starting. What I do think they need to do though is you always want to fill your offensive and defensive line. You want to never run short there. So bring in more linemen. Coach Hawkins talked about bringing in a couple of tight ends maybe because they lose a couple this year. And defensive backs, I think they're going to be running a little short there. So I just think you spread it around and go get good athletes to fill every position.
I think one of the things that'll be exciting for fans in the offseason to look forward to, and it'll start in the spring, is introducing Tony Clemens to the offense. He's a wide receiver transfer from Michigan, spent the entire season this year on the scout team and learning some of the offense along the way, obviously. And everything you hear about these guys, or everything you hear about Tony from these guys, is that he's a great player, and they're really excited to get him involved in the offense when you add him to Marcus Seamus, who had an awesome final month of the season, Scotty McKnight, who had an all Big 12 caliber season, even though he wasn't a first team or second team member of the coaches team today.
And you hope a kid like Andre Simmons still comes around,
right?
So yeah, that wide receiver group could be terrific next year. That wide receiver group should be terrific next year. You heard Chappelle Brown today at his press conference talking about Tony Clemens, and his eyes just got big, and he just had a grin on his face saying, yeah, that kid is good.
Another reason maybe to have a little bit of optimism looking toward next year is you're going to have Tyler Hansen going into spring. The coaches are going to tell you that nothing is ever guaranteed, no job is ever safe. They're constantly competing and whatnot, but you're going to have Tyler Hansen coming off the second half of the season where he was clearly the starter, clearly the number one guy. He'll go into spring as clearly the number one guy.
He's the incumbent.
Right. And most likely he'll be the starter from the beginning of the season next year, and that should help the offense.
Yeah, I think that helps the offense a lot. And that's where I'd like to see him tweak that offense, is to find more ways to use Tyler Hansen's abilities. I don't think he's a great drop back passer. I like him when he rolls out of the pocket. I also think that frees him up a little bit to run if he has to. And I like some of the planned runs they had for him a couple different times. Texas A&M, they used him really well in that regard. So I'd like to see a little bit more of that, tailor that offense a little bit more around his abilities.
One thing I'm really looking forward to next season, Neill, next season, for the first time really in a long time here in Colorado, you're going to have a situation where you're still not going to have a huge senior class. The largest class will be the juniors next year, but you're going to have a depth chart where most of the key players are going to be juniors and seniors throughout, some sophomores in there too, but you're going to have much more experience, and I'm looking forward to not having to hear week in and week out like we have for the past 2 years about how inexperienced and young this team is. That excuse is gone.
Hopefully that translates into they won't have to use that excuse. Hopefully those guys aren't jumping off sides. Hopefully those guys aren't committing motion penalties. Hopefully they're not committing false starts. Hopefully they've learned enough and they've got enough that they don't do those dumb things anymore. We'll see.
So I guess we'll come back and talk.
Oh, we'll see in the spring at least.
Yeah, and signing day too. Signing day, early February.
We'll talk some basketball. We'll get Thorburn on here. We'll talk some hoops.
All right.